The auction hall was filled with murmurs and skeptical glances as the tired, weathered horse limped forward. His coat was patchy, his frame thin, and the once glorious shine of his mane was now dull. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the room, but it barely made a dent in the cold atmosphere that surrounded the animal. The crowd had already made their decisions. The horse was just another rejected lot, unworthy of anyone's attention. "I'm afraid no one is bidding on this one, folks," the auctioneer said, a hint of reluctance in his voice. His eyes scanned the room, hoping for at least one bidder to break the silence. The murmurs grew louder, but the other attendees, some looking for the next champion, turned away. They wanted nothing to do with an animal that had failed to live up to expectations. But then, there was a sound. A voice, quiet, but firm. A young woman stood up from her seat in the back. The room fell silent as she stepped forward, her determination unwavering. All eyes were on her as she slowly approached the auctioneer. "I'll take him," she said, her voice steady and resolute. There was an awkward pause. People shifted in their seats, uncertain if she was joking. But when the auctioneer locked eyes with her, he saw the seriousness in her gaze. This girl, this unknown figure, had just made a decision that no one else in that room had the courage to make. The horse's fate was sealed, but the story was just beginning. No one knew the girl, and no one could imagine why she would put everything on the line for a horse that was already considered a lost cause. The whispers grew louder. "She must be out of her mind," one person muttered. "He's not worth a penny." The girl didn't look back. With a single nod, the transaction was completed. The crowd dispersed, but the girl stood there for a moment longer, her eyes locked on the horse. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. As the horse was led away from the auction block, a sense of disbelief hung in the air. The girl walked with him, every step echoing in the hollow space. Her mind was already racing with the plans she had, plans that would take more than just a horse. They would take everything she had. The auction house doors closed behind them, but this was only the beginning. The girl had just taken a step towards something that no one else would dare attempt. She had taken a chance on the underdog, the one no one believed in. But would it be enough? The journey ahead was uncertain. She had no idea if the horse would ever be able to race again, or if they'd ever be able to accomplish anything significant. But something in her heart told her that this horse, this misunderstood animal, was capable of more than anyone could see. She didn't know how long it would take, or what the outcome would be, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. The days after the auction were quiet, almost too quiet. The girl's small farmhouse sat at the edge of a field, with nothing but the wind and the distant chirp of birds breaking the silence. It was a peaceful place, but for the girl, the peacefulness felt like a constant reminder of the mountain she had just started to climb. The horse, whom she had simply called Champion, was a far cry from the majestic animal she had imagined. His limp was still there, dragging with each step. His ribs were visible, and his eyes, though not cruel, were tired, worn from the years of rejection. It was almost as though he had given up on himself long before the auction. The girl stood in the barn, hands on her hips, gazing at him. What had she gotten herself into? The plan was simple: she would train him, care for him, and help him become something great. But looking at him now, it seemed like an impossible task. The horse barely responded to her voice, barely acknowledged her presence. His spirit had been broken by years of neglect and cruelty. She knew that she couldn't just offer him food and shelter. She had to offer him something more: trust, love, and a chance to believe in himself again. She began slowly, talking to him softly, gaining his trust bit by bit. At first, he hardly reacted. Every attempt to get him to move or follow a simple command ended in failure. He was stubborn, disinterested, and afraid. Sometimes, when she would approach him too quickly, he would flinch, his eyes wide with fear. It wasn't easy. The days were long and exhausting, filled with frustration and setbacks. She'd spend hours grooming him, only to see him shy away when she tried to touch him in certain places. Every step she took toward building a connection with him felt like 2 steps backward. Her body ached from long hours of training, and her heart grew heavy with doubt. "What am I doing wrong?" she whispered to herself late one night. She sat on the edge of a hay bale, watching the horse, who was now lying down in the corner of the barn. The silence between them felt like a weight on her chest. But she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. One afternoon, after weeks of working together, she decided to try something different. Rather than focus on the usual training drills, she spent the day simply walking alongside him. She kept her pace slow, steady, and gentle, talking to him as she walked. She talked about everything and nothing, her childhood, her dreams, her fears. For hours, she walked beside him, hoping that somehow, he could hear her. And then, something happened. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the field, the horse lifted his head. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. He had acknowledged her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. From that moment, things began to change, slowly but surely. The horse began to trust her, piece by piece. Every day, she would walk with him, and he would walk a little farther. Then, she introduced light training sessions, simple commands to start. And though the horse stumbled at first, his determination began to match hers. But it wasn't just physical strength that the girl needed to find in the horse. She also needed to find strength in herself. Her friends, her family, they all doubted her decision. They couldn't understand why she had chosen this horse, this animal that was so broken. "Why waste your time?" they asked. "He's too old. He's too slow. He'll never be a champion." The doubts from those around her weighed heavily on her, and there were moments when she questioned her decision. But each time she looked at the horse, something deep inside her told her to keep going. She couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to something. She pressed on, through the late nights, through the bruises, and through the disappointment. She began to see small victories, moments when the horse moved more fluidly, when he seemed to trust her just a little more, when he began to respond to her commands with less hesitation. It wasn't much. But it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't crazy for thinking that this horse, this broken, rejected creature, could one day become something great. The road ahead was still long and filled with uncertainties. There would be many more struggles, and she knew that. But for the first time, the girl saw a glimmer of hope. It was a tiny spark, but it was enough to keep her going. The weeks that followed were a blur of sweat, patience, and setbacks. The girl, though tired and emotionally drained, pushed forward. She had a goal now, and no matter how difficult, she wasn't going to back down. Each day felt like an eternity as she worked tirelessly with the horse, continuing the slow, steady process of building trust. Despite the small victories she had seen, progress was far from guaranteed. Each time she thought she had made a breakthrough, the horse would take 2 steps backward. The first time she tried riding him, it was a disaster. He panicked the moment she mounted, throwing her off with a force that left her bruised and shaken. The horse seemed to sense her frustration. Every time she approached, there was a hesitation in his step, a reminder of the emotional scar he carried. His body was getting stronger, but his mind still carried the burden of fear. Every sound, every movement seemed to make him nervous. The slightest touch would send him skittering away, and there were days when he refused to even step out of the barn. At first, she tried to force him. Through sheer will, she attempted to make him do what she needed him to do. But that only made things worse. The horse would rear up or back away, and the girl would feel her heart break a little more each time. She realized that she couldn't just make him do things. The horse needed time to heal. He needed to trust her, but more than that, he needed to feel safe. The girl began to adjust her approach. She stopped pushing so hard. Instead of trying to break him, she focused on building a connection. She spent hours simply sitting beside him, reading aloud from her favorite books. She didn't try to teach him anything. Instead, she let the silence between them become a language in itself, one that didn't require words or commands. But the doubts never stopped. Her family and friends were worried, and they voiced their concerns openly. "He's never going to be what you want him to be," they would say. "Why don't you just let him go? There are other horses, better horses." Their voices would echo in her head as she worked in the barn, and at times, she felt the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. "I can't give up on him," she would say to herself, even when her body was exhausted and her mind was clouded with uncertainty. "He deserves better. We both do." One afternoon, as she stood by the gate, the horse caught her off guard. With no warning, he trotted forward, then stopped abruptly at her side. It wasn't much, but it was the first time he had willingly approached her in a way that felt intentional. It wasn't just the physical distance he had closed, but the emotional one as well. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right track. Despite this small success, the girl knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The real challenge wouldn't be teaching the horse to move or respond to commands, it would be proving to herself that she could handle it. She still faced moments of doubt, wondering if she was capable of leading him to success. But with every step forward, the girl felt more confident. She began to ride him again, this time with patience and understanding. The first few rides were still shaky, but the horse seemed to settle under her, trusting her more with every passing day. There were still moments of fear, moments when the horse hesitated or bucked, but the girl knew how to calm him now. They were learning together, each pushing the other to grow. She kept her focus. Every command, every motion felt like a small victory. Slowly, the girl started to notice the horse's natural rhythm. He was strong, his legs were built for running, but it was his heart that had always been the true measure of his potential. And as they worked together, she saw it. The real breakthrough came one rainy afternoon, when the girl decided to push him a little harder. She had been cautious up to this point, but today, she would test his limits. The weather was grim, the clouds hanging low and dark, but she saddled the horse and rode him out into the muddy fields. The first few minutes were tense. The horse fought her, his steps hesitant, unsure of the direction. But the girl didn't relent. She remained calm, her voice steady as she guided him through the sloshing mud. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the horse broke into a gallop. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled, his legs slipping in the muck, but for the first time, he trusted her enough to run. And then, as if something inside of him clicked, the horse's stride became smoother, more fluid. The gallop was awkward at first, but with each passing second, the horse found his rhythm. His legs began to stretch, the power in his muscles becoming evident with every powerful stride. The girl's heart raced with excitement. They were moving in sync, and for a moment, she felt like they were unstoppable. As they slowed to a stop, she couldn't help but laugh. The feeling was overwhelming. It wasn't just the physical success, it was the emotional connection they had built. They had finally crossed a threshold, one that had seemed so far away just weeks ago. But even in this moment of triumph, the girl knew that their journey wasn't over. The challenges would continue, and the road ahead would still be filled with obstacles. But for the first time, she believed that the horse, her horse, could become something incredible. And she wasn't about to give up on him now. It was a cold morning when the turning point came. The girl had been training Champion for what felt like an eternity, and although there had been some progress, she could sense that both of them were at a breaking point. The winter months were harsh, and every day felt like a battle, against the cold, against the doubts that still lingered from others, and against the weight of expectation she had placed on herself. Champion, despite his newfound strength and trust, was still far from the perfect horse. He had a long way to go before he could compete in any race, let alone win. But something about that morning felt different. As the girl walked into the barn, her breath visible in the frigid air, she found herself facing the horse in a way she hadn't before. For the first time, she wasn't just thinking about what he could become, or what she hoped he could do. She was thinking about how far they had come together, and how far they had yet to go. She brushed his coat slowly, her fingers working through his mane, and as she did, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this wasn't just about winning races or proving anyone wrong. Maybe, in the end, it was about finding redemption, both for herself and for the horse. It was about giving them both a chance to overcome the scars they carried from the past. The bond between them had grown stronger, but there was still an underlying tension, an unspoken challenge that neither of them had fully overcome. The fear was still there, deep down, just below the surface. Champion still had his moments, times when the old, broken version of himself would rise up and threaten to undo everything they had worked for. But as the girl stepped back and watched him, she realized that she had been holding on to that same fear. She had been afraid to push him, afraid to ask more of him than he was willing to give. But that morning, something in her shifted. She knew that if they were going to make it, if they were going to have a real chance at success, they couldn't keep holding back. She couldn't keep playing it safe. It was time to take the next step, to trust that the horse was ready for more. Without thinking too much, she saddled Champion. His eyes flicked toward her, wary at first, but there was something different in the way he looked at her. His posture had softened, the tension in his body slowly easing. It was as if he knew that this wasn't just another day of training. This was something bigger. The girl led him out of the barn and into the open field. It was still early, the sun barely peeking above the horizon, casting a soft glow across the snow-covered ground. The air was crisp, sharp against her skin, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt alive, invigorated by the realization that this was their moment. The moment they would either break through or fall apart. She mounted him slowly, taking a deep breath before urging him forward. At first, the horse resisted, his steps slow and unsure. But the girl wasn't deterred. She pushed him just a little harder, guiding him gently with the reins. They moved in a slow trot, nothing extraordinary, but it felt like the beginning of something new. The girl's heart raced as they picked up speed, the cold air whipping past her face, her grip firm but gentle. And then it happened. Without warning, Champion broke into a gallop. It wasn't the chaotic, stumbling gallop he had done before. It was smooth, controlled, he was running with purpose. The girl's heart swelled with pride. They were moving together, as one, finally in sync. The world around them blurred as they moved faster and faster, the snow-covered field stretching out before them. The girl felt the power of the horse beneath her, the raw energy that had been lying dormant for so long, finally unleashed. But even as they reached top speed, something still felt unfinished. The horse's movements were graceful, but there was still a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a part of him still trapped in the past. He had come so far, but the girl knew that they both had more to prove. As they slowed, the girl took a moment to collect herself. She looked down at Champion, who had slowed to a trot once again, his sides heaving with exertion. His eyes were wide, but there was something new there, a spark of confidence, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he had once been. The girl dismounted and patted him gently. "We're not done yet, Champion," she whispered. "But we're on our way." For the first time, the girl saw the potential that had been there all along. It wasn't just about the training, the races, or the applause from others. It was about the transformation they had gone through together. They had both been cast aside, Champion for his brokenness, and the girl for her decision to take a chance on him. But now, they had both proven something to themselves. They were capable of more than anyone had ever thought possible. The journey ahead was still long, but for the first time, the girl could see the finish line in the distance, and it no longer seemed impossible. They had a chance. And she was ready to take it. The early spring air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and new beginnings. The girl felt confident. Champion had been responding well to the increased training, and she had started to believe they were finally on the brink of something great. Every day felt like a step closer to the impossible dream she had once entertained only in fleeting thoughts. She began to plan for the upcoming race season, imagining the moment when they would prove everyone wrong. But as with every dream, there was a shadow that lingered, waiting to strike when least expected. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the setback came. The girl had led Champion out for a routine ride, one she had done 1,000 times before. The plan was simple, a quick training session to work on his endurance. The ground was firm, the weather perfect, and Champion seemed in good spirits. He was moving smoothly, his confidence growing with each passing day. But that afternoon, something was different. As they approached a small rise in the field, Champion hesitated. For a brief moment, his ears flicked back, and his body stiffened. The girl tried to reassure him, but it was too late. Without warning, the horse suddenly reared up, his hooves thrashing in the air. The girl lost her balance and was thrown to the ground with a harsh thud, the wind knocked out of her. She lay there for a moment, stunned. The world around her felt blurry, her body sore from the fall. She had been thrown off countless times before, but this time it was different. As she slowly rose to her feet, she realized that something was wrong. Her ankle, pain shot through it, sharp and intense. She tried to put weight on it, but the pain was unbearable. "Champion," she whispered, limping toward the horse, who had stopped a few feet away, still trembling. His body was slick with sweat, and his eyes were wide with fear. He had always been skittish, but this was something else. The fear that had once held him back seemed to have taken over entirely. The girl looked down at her injured ankle, the swelling already beginning. Her heart sank. She had just begun to feel like they were on the verge of something great, and now this. The setback wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She had no idea how long it would take to heal, or how she would train Champion without being able to ride him. She couldn't even walk properly, let alone work with him in the way he needed. The realization hit hard. She couldn't afford to give up now, not after everything they had been through together. But the girl was faced with a choice: she could give in to the frustration and disappointment that gnawed at her, or she could find a way to push through, to continue without being able to ride, without the usual physical connection. For the next few days, she did what she could. She iced her ankle and kept it elevated, but she couldn't stop thinking about Champion. Was this a sign? Was he just too broken to move past his fear? The doubts crept in, filling the silence of the barn and the stillness of her home. She tried to stay positive, telling herself that this wasn't the end. But the weight of the situation hung heavily on her. Days passed, and though her ankle began to heal, the emotional toll of the setback lingered. She had to make a choice: give in to the fear that they were not meant to succeed, or dig deep and find another way to continue. One morning, when she felt ready to give up, she decided to visit Champion in the barn. Her ankle was still sore, but it was improving, and she needed to see him. When she stepped inside, the sight of the horse standing quietly in his stall gave her a sense of peace she hadn't expected. He was calm, his head lowered as he chewed on some hay. She reached out and touched his mane, her heart swelling with the familiar sense of connection. It was at that moment that she realized what needed to be done. "I don't need to ride you right now, Champion," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together. One step at a time." She spent the next few weeks adjusting to the new reality. Without being able to ride him, she focused on groundwork and communication. She worked with him on leading, stopping, and turning. It was slower, more methodical, but she could see that the horse was responding. They weren't where they had been before, but they were still moving forward, step by step. The girl learned to be patient. She could no longer rely on the usual training methods that had worked so well in the past. But instead of viewing her injury as a failure, she began to see it as an opportunity to deepen her bond with Champion in ways that didn't rely on the physical connection they had once shared. She learned to communicate through touch, voice, and subtle movements, teaching him to trust her in new and different ways. And slowly, something incredible started to happen. As her bond with the horse deepened, so did his progress. The fear in his eyes started to fade, and he began to move with more confidence, even without the constant encouragement of a rider. It was as if they had entered a new phase of their relationship, one where they didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to themselves. But the girl knew this wasn't the end. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but she was learning how to face them differently, how to grow stronger through the setbacks rather than allowing them to stop her. And though she couldn't see it just yet, she knew that this challenge, this unexpected injury, would be the turning point they needed. It was time to start again, from a new place, with a new sense of purpose. The girl's injury had been a harsh reminder of the unpredictability of life. She had spent weeks working to build the bond between her and Champion, and the sudden setback felt like a cruel twist of fate. But as the days passed, something inside her began to change. She realized that the injury, while frustrating, had also given her a new perspective, one that would ultimately make her stronger, not just physically but emotionally. Champion's progress hadn't slowed. In fact, without the distraction of training sessions and riding, the two of them had started to connect in a way she hadn't expected. She focused on him more than ever, getting to know his body language, learning to read his every movement. With each passing day, she saw his trust in her grow. He was no longer the fearful, broken horse from the auction block. He had become something more, something powerful. But the girl knew the real test was still ahead. She couldn't keep avoiding riding him forever, not if they were going to reach their true potential. So, one afternoon, as the weather turned warm and the sun dipped low in the sky, she decided it was time to try again. Her ankle had healed enough for her to walk without too much pain, but it still ached, and the fear of falling again was there, lingering in the back of her mind. But this time, she wasn't going to let that fear control her. She had to show Champion that they could overcome anything, no matter how many setbacks they faced. She saddled him carefully, her movements slower than usual, but with purpose. She could feel the weight of the saddle as she adjusted it, and for a moment, doubt crept in again. But she shook it off, choosing instead to focus on the horse. Champion stood still, his body tensing slightly as she climbed into the saddle. But unlike before, he didn't pull away. His muscles were still, waiting for her next move. "Ready?" she whispered to him, as if asking for permission. She could feel his warmth beneath her, the connection between them pulsing, steady. She nudged him gently with her heels, and Champion took a tentative step forward. It was slow at first, unsure. She could feel him testing the waters, just as she was. The first few minutes were filled with hesitation, but the girl stayed calm, keeping her posture relaxed and her grip light. She knew that she had to trust him completely, just as he had started to trust her. It wasn't about power or control. It was about balance. As they moved out into the field, the girl could feel the old fears start to slip away. The horse was steady beneath her, and she felt the rhythm of his stride, a steady, unbroken beat that seemed to echo her own heart. They moved in tandem, as if they had always been meant to do this together. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Champion wasn't the wild, unpredictable horse he had once been. He was still a little skittish, but he responded to her commands with surprising ease. The more they worked together, the more they seemed to become in sync. With each step, the bond between them deepened, and the girl realized that what they had built wasn't just about physical training. It was about trust, about understanding each other in a way that no one else could see. As the days passed, the girl's confidence grew. They started to work on more advanced skills, pushing themselves just a little further each day. Champion was still far from perfect, but he was no longer the horse who had been left behind at the auction. He was no longer the broken animal that everyone had written off. He was becoming the champion she had always known he could be. One morning, as they rode together under the rising sun, the girl couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She looked at Champion, his mane flowing in the wind, his body moving with grace. He was beautiful, strong, and free. She knew, without a doubt, that they had overcome something extraordinary. And yet, even with the progress they had made, the girl understood that their journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, more races to run, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, she felt truly confident in what they could accomplish together. She smiled to herself as they rode through the field, knowing that the road ahead was still long but that they had the strength to face whatever came next. The day of the race arrived faster than either of them could have imagined. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden hue across the dusty racetrack. The air was cool, and there was an electric sense of anticipation in the air as the other competitors prepared for the event. The girl stood beside Champion, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the enormity of what they had both overcome to get here. She was surrounded by well-groomed horses, sleek and polished, with riders who had the confidence of years of experience. They were the favorites, the ones who had trained for this moment their whole lives. And then there was her, standing beside a horse that had once been considered nothing more than a broken reject, and a rider who had never competed in anything like this before. The girl felt a pang of doubt in her stomach. Were they ready? Was Champion truly prepared for this? They had come so far, but this was different. This wasn't just about trust anymore. This was about everything they had worked for, the blood, sweat, and tears that had gone into this journey. She glanced at Champion, who stood quietly beside her, his eyes alert and focused. He wasn't perfect, and she knew he never would be. But he was her horse, and together, they had built something that no one could take away from them. The race was about to begin. As the competitors lined up at the starting line, the girl felt a sudden rush of nervousness. Her grip tightened on the reins, but she forced herself to relax. Champion shifted his weight beneath her, feeling the same tension in the air. She knew he could sense her nerves, but she also knew he was stronger than he had been. They both were. The whistle blew, and the horses surged forward. Champion moved with them, his hooves pounding the dirt track, the wind rushing past them. At first, he was slow to respond, unsure of the fast pace, but the girl encouraged him, gently urging him forward. "We've got this," she whispered to him. "Just stay with me." They were behind at first, far behind the leading horses, but the girl wasn't discouraged. She had been here before, behind, underestimated, told that they would never make it. But now, it was just her and Champion against the world. As they rounded the first corner, the horse's stride began to lengthen. He wasn't just running now, he was racing. The fear that had once held him back seemed to fade with every step. The girl could feel the energy in his muscles, the power he had been hiding all along. They were moving together, faster, stronger, more synchronized than ever before. But the other horses weren't far behind. As they neared the halfway mark, the girl could see the front runners, their horses galloping effortlessly, their riders urging them forward with skilled precision. The girl's heart raced in her chest, but she refused to let the pressure get to her. She couldn't focus on them. She had to focus on Champion, on the horse who had fought so hard to be here, and on the bond they shared that no one else could understand. "Come on, Champion," she urged, her voice calm but determined. "Just a little more." He responded. With every stride, he gained more ground, slowly but surely catching up to the others. The crowd's cheers grew louder as they witnessed the unexpected surge of the underdog. The other horses began to tire, their pace slowing just a little, but Champion was just getting started. He moved with purpose, his focus unshaken. As they approached the final stretch, the girl's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was it, the moment that would define everything. They were neck and neck with the front-runners now, the finish line just in sight. Champion's muscles rippled beneath her, his every movement fluid and powerful. There was no fear left in him, only a fierce will to succeed. With a final burst of energy, they crossed the finish line together. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The girl could hardly breathe. Had they won? The crowd erupted in cheers, and the girl's eyes searched for the results. It didn't matter if they had finished first, second, or third. What mattered was that they had made it. They had pushed through every obstacle, every doubt, every challenge. They had done it together. And then, the announcement came, and in first place, by a hair's breadth, Champion, ridden by his owner. The girl's heart soared as the realization hit her. They had won. Against all odds, against everyone who had doubted them, they had won. Tears filled her eyes as she pulled Champion to a stop. She dismounted carefully, her legs trembling with adrenaline. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his mane. "We did it, buddy," she whispered. "We did it." The crowd continued to cheer, but in that moment, the girl and Champion were alone in their victory. It wasn't just a race. It was a triumph of everything they had worked for, the struggles, the setbacks, the challenges they had faced together. It was a testament to the power of resilience, belief, and trust. As the girl stood beside Champion, the realization settled in. This was more than a win. This was proof that, no matter how many times life tried to knock you down, you could always rise again. With courage, perseverance, and the right person by your side, anything was possible. And for the first time, the girl saw what everyone else had failed to see. She wasn't just a girl who had saved a horse from rejection. She was a champion, too. The cheers from the crowd still rang in the girl's ears as she stood beside Champion, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. The victory was more than just a race won, it was the culmination of everything they had endured, together. It wasn't just about crossing the finish line first, it was about the journey they had taken to get there, the obstacles they had faced and conquered. She had given everything, and so had Champion. And somehow, against all odds, they had triumphed. But as the adrenaline of the race began to wear off, another realization started to settle in. The girl felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They had won the race, but now what? What came next for them? The barn, the quiet mornings of training, the long hours spent with Champion, everything had led to this. It was easy to get lost in the victory, but now, in the aftermath, the girl felt a nagging uncertainty. Was this all there was? Would life go back to normal? Was this just a one-time achievement, or was there more to come? Champion, standing beside her, seemed to share her quiet reflection. He had always been more than just a horse to her, he had been a partner, a companion, a mirror to her own determination and strength. She couldn't help but look at him with renewed gratitude, understanding that their journey was far from over. But before she could voice her thoughts, something unexpected happened. The loud clamor of the crowd had started to fade as people turned their attention elsewhere, but a figure walked toward her through the gathering crowd. The girl didn't recognize him at first, but as he drew closer, the recognition hit her like a shock. He was the same man who had overseen the auction where she had bought Champion, the one who had doubted her and whispered behind her back. He was one of the skeptics who had dismissed the horse as nothing more than a broken animal, good for nothing but the slaughterhouse. At the time, she had ignored his presence, focused only on her mission. But now, as he approached, the bitterness of those days came rushing back. "Quite the race," the man said, his voice a little too smooth, his expression carefully neutral. "I have to admit, I didn't think it was possible. But there you are. First place. A victory I certainly didn't expect. The girl's eyes narrowed, her thoughts racing. It was clear that he hadn't come to congratulate her. He hadn't believed in Champion, and he certainly hadn't believed in her. The fact that they had won seemed to unsettle him, to challenge everything he had believed about success and failure. "You didn't think he could do it, did you?" she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside. "No one thought we could. But we did." He hesitated, clearly taken aback by her directness. The girl could see the faint flicker of discomfort in his eyes. The truth of the situation hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. The man had been part of the group that had rejected Champion, part of the system that had written him off. And now, he was standing before her, acknowledging the victory that had shocked everyone, including himself. "Maybe I was wrong," he said slowly, his voice a bit softer now. "But I doubt anyone could have known how much you two would accomplish." The girl stared at him, the weight of his words hanging in the air. His acknowledgement wasn't much, but it was more than she had expected from someone who had once dismissed them so easily. She didn't need his approval to know what they had achieved. The victory was theirs, not just in the race, but in the journey, in the trust they had built, in the strength they had discovered in themselves. But there was something deeply satisfying about hearing those words from him, knowing that he, too, had seen the transformation. "You were wrong," she said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "But that's the thing about second chances, they don't always look like what you expect. You gave up on him. But I didn't. And we're here now." The man nodded, a reluctant respect settling in his eyes. "You've certainly proven me wrong, that's for sure. I think I can say I underestimated both of you." There was no smugness in her smile, no victory dance. She didn't need it. The girl simply nodded and turned back to Champion, who was still standing patiently, his head lowered as if to remind her that he was there, always by her side. The crowd's applause was still echoing in the distance, but the girl no longer felt the need to join in. She didn't need the validation of anyone else, especially not the man who had once doubted them. What mattered now was the quiet victory that came from within, from knowing that they had fought for this moment, earned it through hard work, resilience, and a bond that could never be broken. As she patted Champion's neck, the girl realized that this was the true victory. It wasn't about being recognized by others or proving a point to anyone, it was about believing in herself, believing in Champion, and believing in the power of second chances. They had both risen from the ashes, from the doubts and the rejection, and they had emerged stronger than ever. And as she led Champion out of the racetrack, her heart swelled with pride. This was just the beginning. The days following the race were a whirlwind of excitement. News of their victory spread quickly, and for a brief moment, the girl and Champion became the talk of the town. People came from near and far to congratulate her, to witness the horse that had been the underdog, the rejected one, and now a champion. But as the congratulations poured in, the girl found herself retreating into the quiet comfort of the barn, away from the noise, away from the attention. She stood there, in the barn with Champion, just the two of them. The quiet was a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the world outside. The soft, familiar scent of hay and wood filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of Champion's breathing was calming. It was in these moments of stillness that she realized how far they had come, not just in terms of the race, but in their journey together. They had both been broken, both rejected, but they had rebuilt each other. She ran her hands through his mane, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her touch. It had been a long, difficult road to get here, but it had been worth every moment of struggle, every ounce of doubt, every tear shed. They had proved to the world that they were more than their pasts, more than the labels that had been placed on them. But more than that, they had proven something to themselves. Champion had shown her the power of trust. He had learned to trust her when no one else believed in him. He had trusted her when others would have given up. And in turn, she had learned to trust herself. She had believed in him when everyone else told her it was a mistake, when they said she was wasting her time. But she hadn't listened. She had trusted her heart, and it had led her to this moment. As the girl stood there, with her hand resting on Champion's neck, she understood the deeper lesson that had unfolded through their journey. It wasn't about the victory, the race, or the applause. It was about resilience. It was about refusing to be defined by the opinions of others, about not allowing failure or rejection to determine your worth. It was about the courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible, to keep fighting for what you believed in, even when no one else understood. She had been told time and time again that she was crazy for buying a horse no one wanted. That she should give up, that there were better horses out there. But she had seen something in Champion, something that no one else saw. She had believed in his potential, even when the odds were stacked against them. And now, standing there with him, she realized that believing in yourself, in your dreams, and in the ones you love, is the most powerful thing you can do. Champion had taught her that success wasn't about perfection, it was about growth. It was about the willingness to face your fears, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. It was about embracing the journey, with all its highs and lows, and finding strength in the struggle. And sometimes, it was about giving someone, or something, a second chance when no one else would. The girl knew now that she was stronger than she had ever believed. She had fought for her dreams, and she had fought for Champion. And in doing so, she had found the courage to fight for herself. She wasn't just a girl who had saved a horse, she was a person who had saved herself, who had reclaimed her own confidence, her own sense of self-worth. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. With a deep breath, she looked up at Champion, who stood quietly beside her, his head lowered in a peaceful surrender to the bond they had created. They were no longer the same horse and rider who had started this journey. They had been transformed. And in that moment, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the horse, for the journey, for the lessons they had learned together. "Thank you, Champion," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." And as she looked out over the fields, she knew that their journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more victories, and more moments of doubt. But as long as they had each other, as long as they continued to believe in one another, there was nothing they couldn't face. The lesson had been clear all along: it's not the world's opinion that defines us. It's our own belief in ourselves, and in the ones who stand by us, that shapes our destiny. And with that, the girl and Champion walked side by side, knowing that together, they could conquer anything.